Welcome to the All Ambient podcast, where we dig into the creative process, hear untold stories, and explore the brilliant minds behind some of the finest ambient music out there. I'm your host, Mike Graff. I'm excited to be in this together with you. Let's get going. Again, welcome to the podcast, everybody. My name is Mike Graff, and I make music as Dear Gravity. It is wonderful to be here together with you, and I am uniquely excited for you to get the chance to hear from me today. We got to turn the tables, and Ben Tatlow of Antarctic Wastelands interviewed me for the podcast today, and it was a lot of fun. Before we dig into that conversation, I want to say a huge thank you to All Ambient. That's all-ambient.com. What an incredible music licensing site for all things ambient and cinematic music. If you are a creator and you are tired of digging through catalogs that have a bunch of music that might not be the best fit for your project, for any project, All Ambient is absolutely the perfect licensing site for you. Every song that's on All Ambient has been expertly curated. There is nothing on the site that doesn't feel great. And even better is that there are curated song bundles that are all designed around an individual theme or feel that can fit your film, video, your project perfectly. It's absolutely a great solution to your music licensing needs. Go check it out at all-ambient.com. That's all-ambient.com. And if you use the promo code podcast25, you will save 25% on your order. That is a huge savings on an already great deal for some incredible music. And fun fact, when you license your music on a site like All Ambient, you can know that you are directly supporting the artists and allowing them to continue to make more and more music in the way that they do, so that you can continue to make great projects in the very way that you do. What a cool thing. Go check it out at all-ambient.com. So the guest on the All Ambient podcast today is myself, which it feels kind of funny to say that out loud, but I was really grateful to have an awesome conversation with Ben Tatlow of Antarctic Wastelands. He did a great job hosting. It was a lot of fun for him to host, and we got to dig into a little bit of my story, a little bit of how I handle week in, week out rhythms, and I think there's some unique little nuggets along the way that hopefully are helpful to somebody who's listening. It was a lot of fun, really enjoyed it. So here's a conversation with Mike Graff of Dear Gravity.
Today is a special edition of the All Ambient podcast. I'm Ben Tatlow, and I have the very great pleasure of sitting here talking to Mr. Michael Graff of Dear Gravity and so much more. Mike is obviously the regular host of the All Ambient podcast, but today we wanted to sit down and hear his thoughts and feelings and ideas and creativity and inspiration behind his music making and his business sensibility and everything else that he is involved with. So Mike, so great to have you here on the podcast. We have known each other for at least 5 years now, I think. But I'm really looking forward to, just kind of hearing more about your story, how everything started with you. And let's get into it. This is exciting.
It's going to be, well, thanks for having me. And man, I think after hearing you go through the intro, it kind of makes me want to just hand over the reins to you for the rest of forever, because it sounds amazing with your calm British accent and just you handle everything so well. Why am I doing this, man? You should be doing it. But no, I'm grateful to be here. But you called me Michael. That's Ben. Like that is a special little circle of people in my life who call me Michael. You've earned your way into the ranks, man. Well done.
I'm honored.
Well, you in the Department of Motor Vehicles and my in-laws, and that's about it. Maybe the doctor's office. And you've got it. It's all yours.
And PRO registrations. That's where I know your full name from every time I've inputted that into Stim or whatever it is.
It's true. This is very true. That's right.
Awesome. Well, let's get going. So I have, for listeners of the podcast, just so they know, I have the regular questions that Mike usually goes through, but because this is the All Ambient podcast, because we like to keep things fresh, I have added in a few surprises in there, so Mike doesn't fully know what is coming. but
let's go.
But we'll start with the easy ones, and we'll take things from there. So, Mike, how did you get started in music?
Oh man, great question. I'll be as concise as I can. It might take a second though. Music has been a part of my life forever. I can't remember a time without it. Early memories of sitting on my grandma's like red shag carpet listening to Beatles vinyl with the big console over in the corner. Just wild that those are, some of my first memories are just music. I started playing piano. I took piano lessons early, not super early, but like 6 years old. It's probably typical for when people start. I was playing the piano before then, though. Just we had this really nice sounding, I think it was an upright grand. So it had a grand harp, but it was in an upright case. So it had kind of a nice full sound. And I love just kind of plunking notes around, and kind of less important to me was the idea of getting songs together that I had heard before. And more important was just starting to understand whether it was just on my own or once I started taking lessons and all that. It was less about like, oh, I played a really cool song on a piece of paper, and more so like, I'm starting to understand music. Oh, I've got this, I don't know, let me do this melody or this chord thing over here. I was just playing around with it. To me, it kind of felt like a similar thing to just having a blank pad and some colored pencils where I was just kind of sketching. I was just kind of playing around in this medium that was music. And I did that for a long time. I really enjoyed kind of getting to know music through the piano. I started playing drums when I was in 5th grade. I did take lessons for drums, and then I picked up bass and electric guitar, acoustic guitar, all that early middle school, like 7th grade, 8th grade. And I just kind of haphazardly taught myself those from knowing enough about music through piano and drums. But music was always just part of what I did. I don't know if I immediately thought like, oh, I have to do this with the rest of my life. But I knew it was it almost felt like a muscle that just needed to be flexed all the time, which was cool. And my parents were really gracious in the amount of noise that they were letting me make in the house. That was great. There was kind of a moment, if that was chapter 1, chapter 2 was probably right around that 7th grade, 8th grade, when the worship pastor at the church that our family went to, I think I mentioned this to Kirk at one point, but we got like a big old Korg synth workstation at the church. I forget the exact model. It was OMW something, but sequencing was just starting to happen. So this is like mid 90s. This is going to absolutely date how old I am, but like in the mid 90s, being able to do MIDI sequencing on board in a keyboard was a big deal. And I think it had like 16 tracks of MIDI sequencing. So here I am like, I can record 16 different instruments and like they'll play at the same time. It was wild to me. And, we were saving them on like 3.5-inch floppy disks or whatever. It was just so archaic and so awesome. But that was my first foray into like kind of combining sounds together, because like all the other GarageBand wasn't a thing. Ableton wasn't a thing. Pro Tools certainly existed, but it was at the stage in the world of music where you had to pay a lot of money to be in a studio, where there were very few people who were like highly proficient at this software called Pro Tools. Certainly something that a 12, 13-year-old wouldn't be able to ever dream of getting his hands on. But this keyboard was really cool, and I was scratching a lot of itches I had. And so I remember putting together some almost like imaginary soundtracks in my head of like, oh, kind of like a jungle sort of theme. Because, I would just like scroll through all the sounds on the keyboard and like, oh, I kind of like this one. So let's write some stuff on that. I honestly, if you look back on it, it probably sounded a lot like an elementary level licensing music sort of thing, without me having any sort of idea that that's kind of a trajectory that I would be on or anything. It just started happening. It was kind of fun. Compound that with the fact that clearly there was no like audio recording into it. So I wasn't singing into it. And I'm capable of singing. Like I can hold a tune. No one would ever show up to a show because they want to hear me sing. It's not, like your lovely wife, Anita, who has, just like this extremely talented, like signature voice. I'm the polar opposite of that. It's like I can blue collar it. If there needs to be a vocal tone produced, I can do that, but that's about it.
I know the feeling.
Yeah, we're solidarity, man. But like little did I know that kind of that early synth sequencing stuff, it showed me that I could be prolific in certain lanes of music, even if I didn't have, quote, all of the lanes of music, which, sort of the singer-songwriter thing was where I think I initially kind of thought I was going and doing that sort of thing. But yeah, that was just kind of a little precursor of what was to come. Played in some bands in high school. I played in a reggae band in high school. I played drums in a reggae cover band.
Nice.
As a 16-year-old, we thought we were so cool. Oh man. Did some more rock stuff, heavier stuff. Played bass in those bands and just really kind of explored a lot of that. But to be honest, like I don't know how great of a bandmate I was, because I think I just wanted to keep making music. I wanted to keep like I had all these different ideas, all these different musical thoughts, and I'm almost positive that I just stepped on toes everywhere I went. Like if someone was coming up with this idea for this band, it was like, cool. Oh, and maybe we should do this and we should do this and this, kind of acting in a producer role in a lot of senses without realizing that that's what I was doing. But that ticked a lot of people off without me realizing that I was ticking people off because I was, I didn't navigate the social aspect of that very well. I just wanted to make music. That's all I wanted to do. I actually wound up getting one band just kind of dissolved. The other band, I got kicked out of it. Probably for that very reason. I know that there are probably some, personality things that I needed to grow in as well and all that. But I know specifically for the band that I played bass in, like they wanted me to play bass and that's about it. Like just, not production, not really help with shaping songs or arrangements or anything, but like just play the bass. And I didn't know, I should have just said no, right? Like I should have just not done that and then gotten kicked out of it. I should have just been like, well, this isn't the fit. But at some point, it started later on, it just started becoming clear to me that the thing that I do with music has just been there all along. And I was figuring out by way of process of elimination. It's like, okay, so this is not the fit for what I do. This is not the fit for what I do. I was finding lots of not right fits for what I do. I then tried just being, quote, the singer-songwriter thing. And I liked the studio process. I put out, a few songs on that, but I don't really write compelling lyrics. I know that much. I don't necessarily have a lot to say lyrically. And then you compound that with the fact that, my voice is just like the blue collar voice. It's not anything magnificent. It's just kind of there. And so that wound up not really finding ground in the way that I had hoped it would. So to be honest, I didn't like hang up my hat, but I just continued through life and I wound up doing music at a church for a long time. I was a worship pastor for several years, probably somewhere between 10 and 15, a couple different churches. And within that, at some point, there's a whole different skill set that comes with that. It's not just the music stuff. There's all the leadership stuff, managing people groups, a whole lot of sociology and what it looks like to be in a large group setting and, all those things. It was, a lot of learning, a lot of great stuff. But at some point, I felt as though I wasn't being completely obedient to something that was inside of me that was just there. And it was laying dormant in a lot of senses. And at that moment, I did feel it was like, I have no idea what's going to happen. I just know that I need to be obedient to making stuff. I need to be obedient to creating, to put music forward. And so right at that moment, in the midst of a lot of fun projects that I do, that was the crux of it all. Right in that moment was when Dear Gravity was born. So that was, I think, mid 2016 is when I first started just forming the real idea and identity of what Dear Gravity is now. And really, Dear Gravity just kind of became this exercise of, a lot of the music that I enjoyed listening to, but even more so like, what is the music that if you didn't have to appease anybody but yourself, like, what do you want to make kind of in the very same way as you were sitting back in your worship pastor's office, however many decades ago or years ago, just making stuff. And so that's kind of where it began, which fell into sort of this compositional, ambient, cinematic, neoclassical, like, a lot of different genre blending and all that. And I think that's the journey from early to the beginning of where Dear Gravity launched.
It's amazing. It's so great to hear how those through lines kind of existed throughout your upbringing and your different musical influences. I know that's been true for me, that you kind of can look back and you can be like, yeah, I've been doing the same stuff all along, but just in a very different context. And I just think it's really nice to be able to reflect and kind of see how those different experiences have shaped you, but at the same time, you've stayed true to who you are and what you're kind of meant to be doing in that kind of core way. So yeah, that's really, I mean, obviously we've known each other for a long time, but I've never heard kind of that whole story. And so it's really fascinating and great to be able to hear that.
Oh man, it is fascinating to me. Like we can all learn and we can all grow, right? Like we are capable of sharpening skills, of adding new lanes of expertise and all that to what we do. But it is fascinating how much, if we find it, like how much is built into our system in the very first place, and how it can be not only can be like proficient in, like if you tap into that, but also just the ease of it. Like when I finally, and again, it took me a long time to figure this out. I'm kind of a late bloomer in a lot of senses. But when I finally figured out like it was okay for me to not sing, and still there's plenty of stuff in the music world that I am going to be really passionate about, like all of a sudden things just started going that much faster. When it became evident that I didn't have to put together lyrics, all of a sudden things started going that much faster. When it became evident that all of a sudden, hey, you can capture stuff to an extremely pro quality on your own with the level of gear and software and all that stuff that is available now, as opposed to in 95 when you first began. Once I finally got to sort of that core of who I was in the first place, I didn't just feel at home in it. I also, all of a sudden, it was like, this is fun. This is no longer a laborious sort of thing. Like I love this. And yeah, I think there's something inside all of us really that if we just kind of boil it down, like what is the thing that you're really good at doing that's literally second nature to you that we could probably pour some 10x sauce on, right? And let that just explode in your life. Like what is that thing? And what things do we need to, like for me, like getting singing or, lyricist out of the way or things like that. Like what are the things that you're holding on to that once you shed those things are going to allow like your real gifting to just explode? And I think that's probably a big part of my story. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's amazing. And yeah, 100% I'm with you and have felt that very same way myself. Yeah, through the past 10, 15, 20 years. I think that's quite a nice segue actually into talking a little bit more about your creative process and kind of how Dear Gravity, in particular, how the sound of Dear Gravity comes together.
Sure. Oh man, the sound of Dear Gravity. Well, I will say the sound kind of found itself. I know that sounds kind of like I'm avoiding the question, but I promise you I'm not. But the only way that it found itself was for me being willing to just try a bunch of weird stuff. Really just, I'm a big fan of sound design. Not necessarily getting deep in the weeds on turning all the filters and doing all this and that, but like I love being able to manipulate sound just into the very spot that I want to hear it. So to create a bunch of happy little accidents, essentially where you're just, maybe throwing multiple melodies against each other or adding reverb tails or delay tails, that things can almost start colliding with each other. And that's what I call happy accidents, where stuff that you weren't necessarily deliberately intending to land together, but then wind up landing together really nicely. I love that stuff. I think that's some of the most inspiring stuff is when you can begin to create things that just like jump off of just hit your ears and you're like, that is brand new. Like that is a fresh thing. And so that's where Dear Gravity began, is for me just getting really excited about the sounds that I was pulling together, whether it's just like a bass layer, bass BASE, like just like your foundational layer of like an ambient atmosphere. I take a lot of pride in those. I think if you can nail your atmosphere, that goes a long way to helping your whole piece feel really great.
Yep.
So the way that the sound sort of came together has a lot less to do with a very specific decision on, it needs this sound, and more so me just playing with a bunch of stuff and then deciding what things worked really well. I think that's something that I've tried to live by in a lot of senses, where what I typically say is, and I've probably said to you before several times, is that I usually have to weed through about 14 dumb ideas before I get to the 15th one. But that 15th one is perfect. Like it fits well. Like it's exactly what the moment needed. But you had to be willing to like literally bushwhack through the ones that weren't quite the fit. Like just try stuff. It's almost like a micro rejection after a micro rejection where you're just like, oh, that's not it. Oh, that's not it. Oh, that's not it. And I don't necessarily think of that as like, oh, I didn't get that right. But more so, I'm at the point now where I'm like, nope, that just doesn't feel it. That just doesn't feel it. And so on just a grander Dear Gravity scale, I think I'm much more interested in finding sounds, finding melodies, like just little snippets of things that have inspired me, of things that I've just created, like trying out a new guitar pedal or whatever. And I get kind of inspired. So I record a handful of little things. Then that just lives in a session for me. And then in a couple months, I might pull that up and that little thing just happens to work really well with some synth patch that I was dialing in really finely that day. And then like for whatever chord progression I happen to be working on in that, you throw this guitar thing over the top of it and they just start dancing with each other. They start interacting with each other. And sometimes it doesn't work at all, but sometimes it can just then breathe a new thing out of that. So I think that's probably one of the most exciting things about creating for me. And this almost completely flies in the face of someone like Kirk, who has like, he has an incredible template. Kirk, We Dream of Eden, of course. But like, here are some of the specific sounds and things that I go for out of the gates. And those are so important. And I have some of those as well. And I do that. But at the end of the day, like, I want to feel inspired by what's happening with the song, what's happening with the composition. So 9 times out of 10, I will go straight to those little moments of inspiration, whether it was just a little hook, a little melody, a little motif on an instrument, or if it was some kind of like patch or preset that I was working on and dialing in, and just starts throwing some stuff together.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of the overarching Dear Gravity process, but on a more practical level, I try to break, I did not come up with this myself. I don't know who I stole it from, but I try to break down my process into like a time of just playing around with sounds like we already talked about, and then into a time of actual production. So like I'm creating, like we're composing, we're putting the songs together. And that particular time is a lot less about getting it perfect and is a lot more about just building out the song and kind of like filling it out, whether those sounds or those EQs or whatever are the final say. Usually that's not how it works, but I try to play around with sounds, like step one. And I try to separate that from when I'm, composing, producing, and that's kind of step 2. And then I just call it curating, but like then I'll go back to all the, the compositions, back to the production stuff later. And we'll start fine tuning it. And for me, it's really healthy. Like the way that my brain works, it is really important for me to not try to do all 3 of those at the same time. There might be some people who totally disagree with me. There might be some people who that is a really helpful bit of verbiage to kind of help them in how they approach. But I know that if I try to curate while I'm producing, or I try to hunt down sounds, so if I try to step up while I'm producing. So if I try to go to like I need to fine tune this thing right now, I can just totally lose my focus on actually building this song out if I'm like getting really granular over a particular patch. But at the same time, if I'm working on new sounds and just kind of the inspirational stuff, and then I sort of start working on like, oh, super cool, here comes a new song idea out of it. And then to try to fly into that, like it can happen. I'm not trying to make it a hard set rule, but I get really distracted, man. Like I love living in the land where I'm coming up with new sound ideas. And the fact that I let myself get distracted by that sometimes, and all of a sudden I'm working on a new song, a new composition out of this sound that I got inspired by, it would have been a lot better for me personally to just keep finding sounds. And then the next day or the next week or the next month or whatever, to go back to those found sounds, those inspiration points, and then start working with them. So yeah, I try to respect my own rules as much as I can.
That's good.
But that's my creative process. I try to break it down to those 3 and respect those as much as I can. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that comes through in your productions, in your compositions, in the work of Dear Gravity. When I hear it, I hear both a kind of real diversity and variety of sounds and ideas kind of in there, but also a real consistency in terms of that end product, if you want to call it that, or those end albums. They come together in a really consistent, but consistent in the most positive sense. That it flows. It feels like, hey, this is one person really writing in a consistent way, but with loads of different sounds, loads of different ideas. And that's one of the things I really love about your music. Why I kind of initially was like, hey, this guy knows what he's doing. So yeah, that really kind of comes through in your work, and it's great to hear how the behind the scenes of how that all comes together. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I think that looks different for everyone, doesn't it? I mean, having those rules that you kind of set and then break for either per project or just as in a general sense. I know that I have some of those and probably break them more than I should. But it is helpful to have constraints and have.
Yeah. Well, and the existential question is, would you have ever gotten to the place where you were going to have the idea that breaks that rule if you would have never made that rule in the first place? Like
exactly.
you could chicken and egg that whole conversation all day long. But that's I'm with you. Those rules in a lot of senses were made to be broken, but they're made to kind of help pull this whole nebulous infinite thing that we call creativity, that we call, composition, production, musicianship, like to pull that into a set of fences that actually allows us to like release a thing. I need a lot of help, man. I need a lot of help pulling those fences in. Otherwise I'm just lost and, I just kind of like wandering around like a kid in a candy store. It's like, no, wait, we need to like do a thing today. We need to get this out the door. And so not rushing something out the door, but like, let's put things in place that help you focus on what part of this you need to be doing. And
Oh, that's great. So we're going to do something slightly different now.
Let's go.
Which is we're going to do a mini lightning round. And then we're going to come back to the main bulk of the interview questions. All right.
It's like static shock round or something like
bang,
that.
Here we go. All right. So this first question is one you haven't heard, but it links very nicely to what we were just talking about. If you had 3 instruments or effects to create a whole album with, what would they be? And I will add some kind of parameters around that. So it could be, for example, like 1 instrument and 2 effects. It could be 2 and 1. You can't say, contact extreme or whatever it's called. You can't, it has to be one thing. You can have multiple layers of the same stuff kind of thing.
So like if I were to pick, okay, I'm just going to go for it and you tell me if I got this wrong or not. If I had to do a whole, maybe I should do this. This would be fun. I would pick the electric guitar for sure. It's right over there in the corner, but my buddy Jim at Glory Guitars builds great guitars, and he built me a custom Jazzmaster body that it's just this incredible pickup in it that you've heard on a bazillion recordings that I've done. I love it. I would pick my custom Jazzmaster. I would then pick... Does a plugin count? Like an effects plugin? I would pick Echo Boy. I think Soundtoys Echo Boy would be my delay pick of choice. All plugins are great. They're all great. It's not like there's a special sauce inside of Echo Boy, but I do know how to manipulate Echo Boy in the ways that I like to. And there is no shortage of instances of that plugin on any Dear Gravity album that's ever been released. It exists everywhere. So I would probably pick that because of its diversity and because I know how to mess with it. And there is a pad, like a very simple synth sample from Oliver Arnold's on one of his Spitfire collections that I think it's just like a really basic Juno 60 pad that I've used in bits and pieces here and there. But as long as I have the freedom to like roll the filtering a little bit and like kind of find different tones within it, I would probably pick the Juno 60 singular pad, kind of a warm 60 pad from Oliver on Spitfire, my guitar, and Echo Boy. And now you've just plugged a little thing into my brain and I'm wondering when I'm supposed to be releasing this particular
I'm excited
album.
for it already.
That's a great question, man. I love that. It's so cool.
All right.
I'm going to steal it probably, as long as you're okay with that.
Oh, yeah.
I think we need to hear that from other all ambient folk. Yes, that's great.
For sure.
Love it.
All right. Next question. Who would you like to collab with if you could collab with anyone and they don't have to be living?
In the land of Dear Gravity, I would love to collab with the guys from Hammock. I've been a huge fan of them for forever. That could be a really, really cool thing. Well, let's go a little further. I think Tom and Johnny from Radiohead would be wild to collab with. I think there could just be some crazy bleeps and bloops and just come up with some of the trippiest stuff ever. I would love that. And why don't we just go as wild and wide as possible? I live in Minneapolis. I live in a suburb of the Twin Cities, Minneapolis, St. Paul, Minnesota. And of course, the most famous music icon to come from this area is none other than the dearly departed Prince, who was just a mastermind on so many levels. My wife and I, we got to tour his home / studio / the soundstage where he shot a bunch of stuff, Paisley Park, just out in the western part of the Twin Cities. They've turned it into a museum, which is fascinating. And we got to go tour that about a year ago. And honestly, man, like to be aware of just how not just versatile, but like how he had ideas about everything. Like it wasn't even a control thing, I don't think. It was just like, I've got 45,000 ideas every second about this thing, that thing. And then, to combine that with his level of talent, like people are going to just help accelerate all these crazy ideas that he has, which is awesome. And so I have no idea what that album would look like. I have no idea what we would do, but it would be trippy. I think Prince would just be, for kind of being one of the original guys who really grabbed on to like multi-instrumentalism and dialed that in very, very well himself, like within, the recording studio space back when, kind of what I was saying before, where like it was expensive to do, just to spend time in studio and all that. And he figured out how to just crush it. And I would love to collab with Prince. Rest in peace.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. Well, let's shift gears back into the regular question. We'll come back to another lightning one in a little bit.
You got it.
But I know that you schedule in your days and your weeks quite in quite a structured way, which I'm always a little bit in awe of, because I do that and then it just never happens. And so I'm like every year, every month, I'm like, this is what I'm going to be doing. And then a whole bunch of other stuff kind of takes over. So I'm really interested to know kind of how that process works for you, if it works for you, and also then kind of what an average day or week might kind of look like.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So the way that I've tried to figure it out, it really responds to a lot of my life rhythms and tries to help me keep a balance between working, working diligently, but also not completely swallowing up all the time I have for my wife, for my kids, for my health, for, all that. And so what I do is I should say all this with a grain of salt. Life happens, right? You and I were just talking before we even started recording, like life happens. I mean, 60 seconds before we started recording this podcast, my 8-year-old came wandering into the studio and was like, hey, I need help with the thing. And it's like, buddy, you knew what I was doing. Like we were about to hit the button. And I love Braden. He's amazing. But that, life truly does happen. And I have had to learn to let go of, if by planning my week or my days or or whatever, like those are good things. But if I then begin to worship that as like the very, very specific thing that needs to happen, otherwise I'm going to be cranky with the world if it doesn't happen, that's not a great thing. So it really is a balance, I think, to acknowledge that life does happen. But, can I build some margin into my life so that it doesn't throw it all off? So what I do, Ben, is that I try to focus on a single creative project a week. So like when I'm focusing on Dear Gravity, it's like I'm working on this particular album. I'm going to work on it all week. When I'm focusing, and I'll explain that a little bit more in a second, but when you and I are working on Grey North stuff, I try to focus in on just that. When I'm working with Marshall or, with another collab or whatnot, I try to just give it a week. Like I try to just do that. And I think that has more to do with, I don't think we as humans do a great job of acknowledging how much energy, how many brain calories it takes for our like mental capacity to go from this thing to that thing. And then onto this thing, and then onto that. Like on paper, it looks like we can do it, right? Mm-hmm. But in reality, like it takes a lot of work to shift from this thing to this thing to this thing, especially with my brain where I'm trying to think about the 40,000 different directions it could go and all that. So I try to focus on one thing a week. And when I say like a week, what that means for me, and there will always be miscellaneous stuff, administrative stuff, like little cleaning up podcast episodes and things like that I always try to leave for my afternoons. So I do kind of a late lunch, and then I have about 3 hours in the afternoon that is just, kind of cleaning up that stuff. So I leave the, I don't want to call it busy work, but I leave the less creative stuff for later in the day. But I do block once I'm up and once the kids are off to school and I've gone to the gym, like I have the studio, like I am blocked for about 4 hours every day is what I do. And I, like, to the absolute best of my ability, I do not let that get negotiated away. If I'm going to negotiate something away, I can really easily negotiate away an afternoon of busy work, right? Like I can push that stuff around, but I know that like my soul would feel a whole lot different if I accepted an appointment with somebody at 9 a.m. instead of 3 p.m. Like it's just going to feel different if I didn't get my studio time in for the day. And that doesn't mean that, again, like if you got to flex, you got to flex. But yeah, I really, I try to honor that to the best of my ability. And then you just look at it like compound interest, right? Where like you can get kind of fed up at how little you accomplish in a week. But then if you're just really consistent with it, all of a sudden a year goes by and you're like, oh, I did quite a bit this year. And then all of a sudden you look at it in 5 years and you're like, oh man, like we got some stuff done like this. And not that it's about volume or whatever metric you're measuring, but I do know at the very least that I'm putting in the hours that I want to. If I put in more, that can probably be a problem. If I put in less, I do start to feel it. And I know that that it's worth more of my focus. But I think as of right now, I've found kind of a sweet spot in putting in a good solid half day, do kind of a late lunch, and then off to whatever other little things that need to happen for the day. So yeah, that's kind of what it looks like.
That's awesome. I'm convinced that you have a slot on Tuesday afternoons, your time, Wednesday morning, my time, when you reply to my emails and my voice messages. Yeah. There's like a half-hour slot in there, like reply to Ben. And that's like, without fail on Wednesday morning, I'll wake up and I was like, oh, there we go. We've got,
awesome.
got my voicemail message from Mike. No, it's great. I genuinely love how you structure your day. I wish I could structure my days in more of that way. And as I said, every year I set out that intention, and every year, I fall short. But I will this year. I'm gonna try it even more.
Well, let's again just quick little caveats on that to give you permission on that. We as humans are really good at measuring ourselves by the things on our list that we didn't do instead of by the massive amount of things that we did do. I think that like I'm just prone to doing that. If I have a list of 100 things and I got 95 of them done, I will get ticked about the 5 that I didn't do and I'll beat myself up over it. And that's just dumb, man. Like that, what that probably says is less about like I should be ashamed with myself, and I should probably just be honest with myself and be like, dude, you were never going to get all 100 of those things done in the first place. Like be a little bit more realistic on the fact that life happens, right? And I think along with that is you and I both, like we have young kids, right? Like, we're both married. I have a 12-year-old, 8-year-old, and a 6-year-old. And I love my family dearly. They are they are my everything. I'm so grateful for them. But they are other human beings that all have important ideas, all have stuff to do. Stuff happens in life. And so if I keep looking at the fact that life happens and it looks like an interruption to what I'm doing, instead of me just being willing to hold things a little bit looser and say, like, this is what I'm trying to shoot for, but oh yeah, something went down. What can I do? How can I help? It really does have to be a blend of those things, because at the end of the day, I'd rather do a little bit less and not be an awful husband and absent father, instead of like, hey, I didn't get quite as much done, but I love my wife and that relationship is still solid, and I love my kids and those relationships are still solid. So just find the blend, man.
It's a really good reminder. And thank you for saying that and for kind of giving that permission. I think it's important as artists and as business owners, as we both are in a different context, to give yourself permission to say, hey, we didn't get everything done, and that's okay. One question that I like to ask people, because I think it's just an interesting insight into how you view music and art and business and life, is what does success look like to you in your life?
Yeah, I think I would have answered that different at different stages, right? And I was just talking with a friend yesterday who will wind up drumming on an upcoming, not a Dear Gravity project, but another project I got going on. Great drummer, incredible drummer. We were talking about metrics. I mean, whether it's the number of streams on a record, whether it's the number of tickets that you sell for a venue, like the size of the venue, the size of the licensing, things like that. I think we as humans are really good at reading into metrics and attaching importance to them in ways that were never meant to have done in the first place. Like, I think it's cool to watch songs get 6, 7, 8, figures worth of numbers of streams. I think that's great. I love that. I also do not measure my value as a human being. I don't measure my ability as an artist by the number of streams that show up or the number of licenses from this album that get downloaded. It doesn't mean that this one did better than that one. And I think I've probably used this as an example on the podcast before, but there was a release recently, something that I probably spent about a fifth of the time that I normally do on a Dear Gravity release. It still turned out great. I love it, but it was decidedly more minimal to release out into the world, and wound up on a particular platform, doing very well, like exponentially beyond what I would have expected it to do. Mm-hmm. And if I were to look at that, and I could start grumbling really fast, right? I could start being like, man, I put all this hard work into all these other releases, and how come they don't do, even, a quarter of the level of that? And man, I only spent, this amount of time on that thing, and it winds up doing super well. I think you could just talk yourself into a downward spiral really fast if those things are the type of things that you measure as success. So for me, at the end of the day, success for me needs to include just a couple things. And those things are that I am, one, being obedient to the craft because I know it's in me and I know I'm supposed to do something with it. Number two is that it is something that I genuinely want to listen to. Like, I would go back and I want to plug that right into my queue. I want that to be a part of my life. If it doesn't hit that measuring stick, then I've still got to work on it. Like, it's just something still has to work in a release. And then number three, that it doesn't stay hidden, that it is something that I'm daring to put out into the world, whether it, does modestly well, whether it does extremely well. I can't measure successfully by that. I think another kind of a little asterisk to that is, getting a connecting community with, guys like yourself, like Kirk, like Marshall, like, all the incredible people that we have in the all ambient community and beyond. I think if you are a good hang, it not only is great for networking, but really just to remind other people that, hey, like, you're not alone in this. We're all creatives trying to figure this thing out. And hopefully we can encourage each other to a level that this just feels a little bit less daunting after us hanging out than it did walking into a conversation. So yeah, I think those are probably my success metrics. And with that, I think I'm going to be able to keep hitting them as long as I stay focused on them. So yeah.
That's good. It's good. Thank you. Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. And it's really insightful and helpful to hear other people talk about success and the things that one values in that journey and kind of the degrees of value that you give to them. I think it's not only fascinating, but really helpful. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. We're going to zoom right back into the lightning round.
Sure.
And we're going to segue from what you were just talking about. So if you had maybe 2 or 3 tips for someone wanting to follow your footsteps, what would they be?
Yeah, it's probably just a recapping of some of the stuff I've already said, but I think show up, try stuff, play around, keep it exciting. For you to just be in the world of music, there's a joy just in that. You'll get faster within your DAW, within Logic or Ableton or whatever you pick. You'll get incrementally better at that. You'll get incrementally better at all the little bits and pieces along the way. But as long as you're enjoying it, that will be what you need to continue to move forward for sure. And then along with that, I think consistency is a big deal. I think it is worth it to say, you know what? At the end of the month, would I rather have burned through my Netflix queue to another whatever degree, or maybe set aside, I mean, let's just a baseline, like 60 minutes or 30 minutes a day, or not even, maybe like 1 hour 3 times a week, whatever your schedule looks like. But let me be consistent on some type of schedule, and then like just commit to that for like 6 months or whatever, and be willing to not grade yourself on it until you're done with, 6 months of work. Then you get to look back on it and be like, oh my goodness, I am so much further along than I ever would have imagined. Because when you pull up a blank session and you start cracking open things, it can feel like you have done a whole lot of nothing, right? But if you show up day in, day out, week in, week out, and you just keep creating, it piles up really fast. And again, maybe that's where my memory comes into play, because sometimes I forget about the stuff I've been working on, and then I pick it back up a couple weeks or a few months down the road, and I'm like, whoa, that thing was really cool. And if you just stay in motion, you can almost create those happy little accidents in that way. And it's funny because I released something last year with Echoes Blue, and there was a piece that had kind of been waiting in the rafters, I believe. Like, it was something that I hadn't touched for a while, but all of a sudden it struck me as something that felt really, really right to release with this particular EP. And what a kind of cool thing to just have that in my trove of things I had worked on over the months, and to find the right spot for it to fit. I think that was a nice, happy little accident right there. Yeah.
I love it. I love when stuff that one has written a long time ago. I don't know if I've told you this, but there's some tracks with Grey North that we've released that, are based on starters that I wrote like in 2010, maybe 2011, like way back. And like maybe released in a different form or whatever, and, didn't really do anything with them. And it's like, you know what, that's, I wouldn't release it in that form again, but there's an idea in there. There's a sound in there. There's something about it that still feels kind of relevant and kind of exciting. And so, it's fun when that kind of that comes into being. Man, this has been a good chat. I really just enjoyed hearing your heart for the music, but the creative process and the kind of mix of structure, but also happy accidents, and the encouragement to be consistent through what you're doing and showing up. I think that is so important, but also just such a good reminder for musicians and creatives at whatever stage of the journey you're on. So Mike, thank you for turning the tables, letting us kind of hear from you on the All Ambient podcast. Usually you are the one doing the questioning, but today it's just been so good to kind of hear from your perspective.
Oh, man. Well, I appreciate the encouragement, Ben. And thank you so much for being an incredible host. My goodness, you crushed it. And honestly, you should just take the reins because you're awesome. But I'm grateful for the kind words. And for there to be encouragement. I've had the fortunate opportunity to say yes, to music full time for about 6 years now, which is wild. It's great. But that does not mean that I am at a better stage than anyone else who might be listening to this, or that you need to like step number one is go full time in music, and then you can start doing like a lot of the things that I practice right now had to be put into practice in smaller micro versions of what they are now for me to have gotten anything done. Like while I was still on staff at the church, right? Like while I was still managing other responsibilities outside of creating music and doing sound design, on a full-time basis, like I had to be really schedule conscious to do so. So please do not let it be something that makes you feel disqualified. Anyone who's listening, disqualified if you are still just trying to find those few hours within your schedule each week or each month to do this. I guarantee that if you put the time in and you just keep falling in love with the process, it will grow. And then you get to kind of figure out what that looks like as far as it growing into your, a bigger commitment or maybe a full-time commitment or what that looks like. But continue to grow and continue to be consistently faithful to it, no matter what stage you're at, and you will see growth for sure.
What a good way to close out the first, I'm sure, of many interviews with you on this podcast in the future. We'd of course love to hear more. I have a whole list of other questions I'd have loved to ask you today, but that is a great way to kind of close us. So thank you for being on the podcast, Mike.
Thanks for having me, Ben. Thank you again for listening to the All Ambient podcast. Music throughout today's episode was from the catalog of Dear Gravity, and you can find all of this music along with a bunch of other incredible songs, bundles, and other resources from an amazing group of composers and producers at all-ambient.com. And be sure to use the promo code podcast25. That's podcast25, and you'll get 25% off of any product at all-ambient.com. It's a great opportunity to save even more on an incredible resource for your next film, video, or project. Don't wait for another second. Head over to allambient.com and use promo code podcast25. Again, that's podcast25 to get 25% off of your next purchase. Make sure that you subscribe to the podcast so you can catch every conversation we have with all these incredible people who share the same passion. I'm looking forward to the next time. I hope that you are too. Can't wait to see you then. And until then, have an incredible day. Here's hoping that this music and the heart behind it makes your day and life that much better. See you next time.